She's called Holland 1, formerly known as Her Majesty's Submarine Torpedo Boat No. 1. She recently returned to Gosport after a record dive of some 69 years. She required some assistance with her surfacing procedure, and with the aid of naval divers, the Marine Services Department and Devonport Dockyard, she was brought safely to the surface from nearly 200 foot. It was a very difficult salvage operation.
She quite simply represents the Navy of today, the submarine service of today, and indeed all the navies, in all the major navies of the world. All these submarines were developed directly from this little submarine we now see in front of us.
What's particularly interesting about her?
Well, there's her shape to start with, which is exactly the same as a modern nuclear. I think some 40 times less large, a tiny submarine by comparison, but the same shape, short and fat and stubby, and that's the right shape for a submarine. If the Mary Rose represented one of the first battleships of the surface to be known, this was the first underwater battleship ever to be known.
But 80 years ago, Britain's glorious surface fleet felt threatened by the very idea. Damned un-English was a senior Admiralty view. The submarine's inventor, an Irish-American, John Philip Holland, saw it as a weapon against which there was no defence. He said, you can't see underwater, you can't fight underwater, hence you can't defend yourself except by running away. He'd once hoped she'd make the British flee and achieve an independent Ireland, but pragmatically decided to sell his idea to the enemy. She was built, the first of 5, by Vickers at Barrow-in-Furness and launched in 1901. It was the first type of submarine and as such used by all the world's major navies, including Russia, Japan, the Netherlands and Chile. She never fired a shot in anger, but the United States, who'd commissioned a similar vessel at the end of the 19th century, recorded the loading and firing of a torpedo. With only one torpedo tube and 2 reload torpedoes, Holland 1 wasn't the ultimate weapon its inventor had hoped, but on exercises made an impression on the surface fleet and on the crew.
It was very small and very cramped. I think they were more, they're just experiments, really, to see if a submarine was any good to the Navy. I think they had a crew of about 8, as far as I can remember, when they were in commission. It was very cramped. I was very surprised to learn that she had a loo on board, because later on, when I was in the A-class and C-class submarines, we had no loo at all. They slept very close together. I think that one used the probably a stoker's backside as one's pillow. We were looked upon as a lot of pirates. I think the old Navy captains looked upon us as just something that ought to be eliminated.
After 12 years, Holland 1 and her crew had paved the way for modern submarine warfare, but she was obsolete. She sank on her way to the breaker's yard and lay undisturbed until a Plymouth man realised that she might still exist.
While researching in the Naval Library in Plymouth, I found a cutting of the Holland No. 1 having sunk while on the way to the scrapyard. And I photostated it and put it aside because it wasn't really an accident for my book. And then after a number of years, I found a cutting of a French submarine which was salvaged, and then put me to thinking that we could have our own submarine if it was in good condition and someone could find it. Well, I decided that I should write to Commander Compton Hall, the curator of the Submarine Museum at Gosport, and his first reply was he didn't really know what I was talking about. And I sent him the cutting, and then he obviously realised what it was. He was very pleased, thought it was a very good idea, and he's taken it from there.
That was a very exciting clue. It made it well worthwhile digging hard into the records. And from then on, it was a little bit of detective work. Now, there were lots of sources we could go to, I dug out old records and had a very careful look at the chart with help from the hydrographer of the Navy and so on, and eventually established that it really must be about 3.5 miles east of the Eddystone Light. A little bit south of that, probably, allowing for tides and everything else.
Get the divers down, have a look at it. That's the tower.
The first murky pictures of a shape that could be a submarine were taken only 180 yards from the spot researchers had chosen. A remote camera was lowered down to 60 meters after a naval minesweeper had pinpointed an unidentified vessel in the area. Even those murky shots told them the porpoise-shaped hull was there and the project worth pursuing. But it was another 12 months before anyone had a closer look.
He just wants to tighten if we can get her off the bottom again.
Okay. Hoist 5, please, George.
In August 1982, the Seaforth Clansman arrived on site, a diving vessel on charter to the Royal Navy. She carried webbed metal straps that would be passed under the submarine's belly to lift her to the surface. But before the divers could even consider positioning the lifting strops, there was work to be done. They had no idea what they might find 200 feet below. Even in August, the Eddystone can experience turbulent weather. If conditions closed in and time was lost, the whole project was at risk. The Navy saw the exercise as useful training, but it wouldn't allow bad weather on this to jeopardize other work. But before the divers were committed to the deep, they surveyed their task with a remote-controlled camera. It gave them just a glimpse of what awaited them, but couldn't answer important questions, such as were the 60 batteries, each weighing 900 pounds, still inside. What they saw was the most silent member of the silent service, shrouded in silt and plant life and only patrolled by passing mackerel. She listed 10 degrees to starboard, apparently sunk in 2 or 3 feet of coarse sand. The divers prayed there would be no bedrock to hinder them. How she came to rest will remain a mystery. How on that cold October morning, just before the First World War, she foundered en route to Milford Haven and slid from sight. As the towing vessel cut her free, they little knew they were giving future marine archaeologists their greatest discovery for many years. Bringing her from the darkness depended first on a team of 20 divers. They had to live in saturation for up to a month in cramped conditions, with only a few of life's necessities. The team aimed to put in 20 hours a day, each of them working a 3.5-hour stretch. Their life depended not on air, but on a mixture of helium and oxygen, which carries its own risks. Losing heat from their bodies 6 times faster than normal, they were prone to infections, particularly fungus and rot. Locked from the outside world, they depend on their mates and a rigorous system of checks and double checks to ensure they survive.
Give me an internal depth reading. 3 pairs of hot water gloves. 2 divers harness with bailouts.
4 extra weights. Standby divers harness. 3 knives. 3 torches. All working.
Bottle gauge. Toolkit.
Inside the bell, the divers know that beneath the surface, they can be ensnared by the fishing tackle caught around the submarine's rusting hull. Within 30 feet, they'll begin to see the netting, otterboards and floats around them. Cocooned by the water in a muffled and padded environment, they soon began to make out the cloudy but famous porpoise shape on the seabed. He worked in teams of 3, 2 outside the bell and 1 inside in case of emergencies. The constant battle against the cold went on inside their diving suit, fought by circulating hot water. The hull was cleared with a variety of cutting equipment, including garden shears. Then the submarine's belly marked up for the metal lifting strops. Soon a collection of nets and assorted metal appeared on deck, washed off with fresh water and chemically treated with preservative, while the first diver reported on the submarine's condition.
Well, it's in surprisingly good condition considering, although the outer hull is starting to break up in some places. The rivet heads are missing, but we believe that the pressure hull is still in quite good condition. It's mostly a sand and gravel seabed, so there's very little in the way of silt. It's not built up too much around the edges. It should make our job a little bit easier because of that. We just want to prove to everybody that we can do a good job and salvage a submarine.
But salvage work carries its share of frustration. First, one of the wires to the carrying strop snagged on the submarine and parted. Then the weather worsened.
Plymouth approaches. Plymouth approaches. Salvage operations. 50.
In spite of repeated warnings to shipping, plans to recover lost ground after a night in port were thwarted when there was news that a trawler had caught and lost her nets on the submarine. Everyone prepared to begin work again. As the Seaforth clansman prepared 4 divers for saturation, she scoured the area, not knowing whether the trawler had seriously displaced the marker buoy. The bad weather had taken its toll on the diving conditions too, and the work below had to go on in extremely bad visibility.
Hello inside. Yeah, well, the situation, we're going quite well. We're actually on the submarine, on the stern of it somewhere. We've not seen any sign of any netting there from this fisherman yet. Just a little bit concerned as to where it is. And we're just going to pull you off to one side. I hope it'll be on the starboard quarter of the submarine, 5 or 10 feet. And then we'll be sending you down. Okay, so I hope to have you away within half an hour if we're lucky. Well, we want you to get down there for a look-see, and if all's well and there's no great crisis, we'll get you to carry on seeing what you can clear. But it's getting a bit dark and the visibility's not quite what it was, so we're having trouble seeing with the camera.
As the first team of divers descended, others prepared to follow. Valuable time was slipping away. Another southwest gale could jeopardize the whole project. The divers explored the hull inch by inch, searching in the gloom for the nets trapping the submarine on the seabed, and checking their earlier work hadn't been destroyed. Were the metal strops still in the position they'd laboriously marked over numerous descents at the strongest points in the hull? Or had they too been a victim of the gales or a trawler? It was a tense time for those whose vision was restricted not just by the gloom, but by a monitor.
What we discovered down there is that the divers have been out on the submarine. They found that both strops are intact and undamaged, though we don't know where the wires are leading at the moment. The netting that the fishing boat put on sometime last night is snagged somewhere on the bow of the submarine and on the shackle of the forward strop. Fortunately, we think it's only the edging rope that is snagged, and we're now going to get the diver to go out, attach the bulk of the net to a couple of strops on the crane, and then he's going to do his best to cut the edging rope as we gently take the strain on the crane, and with any luck it should come free, as happened with the one previously.
After 2 attempts, the net was free and hoisted aboard by the crew.
Hey, keep rolling, quick! Pick up her space!
As they heaved it onto the deck, more divers went into saturation to recover the broken lifting wire. As they were working below, their mates were enjoying the thought that there are other things you can reclaim from the sea that fit nicely into a frying pan.
It's full of road. It's full of road.
Unfortunately, the divers would be late for supper. Physically, they were out of the ocean, but faced another 2.5 days of decompression. After listening to the weather forecast, it was agreed the swamping operation should start. This meant attaching 2 main lifting strops to a heavy weight and dumping it over the side, clear of the submarine's hull, ready for the salvage vessel Pintail to pick up.
How's that leading? Nice, still weak underneath here.
As they recovered the buoy holding the lifting wires, the crew knew that with swamping, the Seaforth clansman's job would be complete, and for them it would just be another task well done.
One or two items have taken a little longer than I initially hoped at the time, but overall it has been a 100% successful diving operation. We have done everything we'd hoped to, and indeed in one or two cases more.
Soon it was a weight off their minds. And a burden left for the pintail. With one vital stage complete, a proud Navy ferried journalists the 14 miles to the Eddystone site, only to find they weren't welcome aboard.
Basically because of the dangers involved in the lifting of the submarine from the seabed. There's a possibility that the wires might part, as it is the first attempt at the lift.
So what are they doing on deck at the moment?
At the moment, the wires are slowly coming in as the pintail drifts over the Holland, and they're actually riveting the wires together as they come up to take the strain. Obviously, there's a sort of strain of 120 tons actually on the wires.
And how long will it take to know whether they've got it off the bottom?
I've had an estimate from the salvage team, and they reckon that 2 to 4 hours before they know whether the submarine is clear of the seabed or not.
At low tide, the pintail began to inch in the cables holding the metal strops around the submarine's belly. As the tide rose, she crept over her, and slowly, ton by ton, the hull began to lift. The journey to the shelter of the coast was slow and painstaking, the route chosen to offer the submarine most protection. And taken in stages, as the waters shallowed, the pintail halted to allow the men to ease up the dead weight just a few more meters. Every inch gained from the sea was secured by massive bolts. The men sweated in the autumn sunshine for a rotting hull that for them wasn't even a memory, and if a cable broke, it would lash them from the deck. So as the pintail crept in with the afternoon tide, she paused for the last time and gave the men a glimpse of the vessel for which they'd fought.
Brilliant. As long as we don't lose it. That's our job. Don't say someone lose it.
For the first time in 70 years, Holland 1 was within reach of the surface. For those on deck, she was just a ghostly shape shimmering through the lapping water. But as she lay secure under Pintail's bow, we became the first to take a lingering look and to record her in colour. Our diver finned around the hull, which was almost entirely complete. All the obvious points where water might have entered were still sealed. The conning tower was intact. The exhaust from the petrol-driven engine was clearly visible, and as the silt cleared, the huge brass propeller loomed up, dimmed by the clusters of plant and animal life that had been wrenched with it from their home near the Eddystone. With the knowledge that she was secure and intact, the crew lowered her gently down to a less turbulent level for the last leg. In relief, they joined her. But as one person's responsibility ended, another's began.
Through the submarine, you know, as long as there's nothing sticking out on either side.
There shouldn't be anything sticking out.
On these terms, it's going to be the easiest way to cut through there.
So if one can measure from the forward leading edge of the conning tower there and aim to cut someplace that's convenient down this line here, I don't think you'll find any problems.
No.
But she had yet to safely reach the shore.
Just under 150, so that'd be fine.
Submarine will smell the bottom. What we've found, that's where the water pressure of the submarine pushing against the bottom, it starts vibrating it, and we know we're getting very close. And as soon as we believe there is a contact, then it's full of stern on the engines, drop stern anchor, and let her settle, and then drop the thing on the bottom.
The cables eased her gently to the spot on the ocean floor where she would spend her last nights of freedom, silent and unmolested. A small area had been marked out with yellow buoys just off Drake's Island, and Pintail sighted her within 3 inches. She lay there for nearly 3 months, which gave me the chance to explore her. The generally murky water of the Sound had been churned up by naval divers, but their scarlet guide ropes led straight to the conning tower. The spongy plant life shone through the gloom. It was impossible to see more than a few feet, and knowing she was only a yard short of a cricket pitch didn't make her feel any smaller. Just the propeller made me feel like a sprat. The conning tower bubbled like a cauldron with the silt being pumped out by Navy divers. It was their job to clear out the muck and remove over half the 60 batteries. The batteries were valuable in a number of ways. Chloride wanted to see if they worked, and they did. And the scientists wanted to test the lead content for contamination. The Holland 1 went down before atomic tests and hadn't been exposed to ambient radiation. At the end of November, with her weight reduced to 80 tons, the Pintail returned to carry the submarine into Devonport dockyard. It was the turn of dockyard divers to guide her into a special cradle beneath the surface. It was the first time they'd berthed an unseen vessel, and chocking up the Holland 1 made a change from nuclear submarines.
I was surprised with the condition of the hull in general. It's in amazing good condition, especially one particular grating I saw on the fore end was in immaculate condition.
So do you think when they drain the water away, she's now going to be stable, or is she going to fall over?
I think when they drain the water away, Denver will be sorry to lose her. She would be a credit to the yard.
Told the submarine was firmly wedged, it was the Pintail's turn to go. But any plans to drain the dock the same day were squashed by the chemical company, which had to preserve her. The short November day was dwindling, and with it, the temperature. They knew that once she was exposed to air, she would only exist for another 24 hours, a risk they couldn't take.
It's possible if the reaction doesn't work quickly enough, she'll fall to bits, and so the whole exercise will be a waste of time, and so it's better to postpone it for another 12 hours and do it properly in the morning.
By first light, she was visible and flying a flag like any other returning vessel. Navy divers had seen to that. 8 million gallons of water drained from the dock every hour, and the 60 tons of water inside her pumped out at the same rate. Otherwise, she would have collapsed. But finally, she lay beached across a dock whose width was normally filled by the girth of a modern nuclear submarine. But to all involved, size was unimportant. She was perfect.
Marvellous. She's even better than I hoped. She really is perfect. She looks the part, doesn't she?
And for Devonport Dockyard, it was a challenge such as they'll never see again. And for modern naval architects, a salutary lesson. They couldn't help wondering if their submarines would survive 70 years on a reef.
I think this is probably the most difficult docking we've done, certainly in my time here. We weren't sure at all of the structure of the submarine, whether it was strong enough to take the loads of a docking. We weren't sure of the shape. All we worked off was a very small-scale drawing. We weren't sure how accurately Vickers had built it, and what 70 years on the Eddystone Reef had done to it, we had no way of assessing. So we designed a cradle off a small-scale drawing. In fact, we were only 2 inches out in a length of 64, 65 feet, and I think that's incredibly accurate.
Cleaning her was a less delicate operation. Water jets that usually sliced through reinforced concrete melted away the rust and animal life with a force of 9,500 pounds a square inch. By the next day, she'd been cleaned and chemically treated with a substance that converted the rust to hard metal. The scaffolders built a working platform for the men who would dismember her. First to go was the conning tower, but even with modern equipment, it wasn't an easy job.
She's had 1 or 2 surprises for us. In taking the conning tower off to get under the lowest bridge between here and Gosport, we came across some rivets. Took a long time to get these rivets out, and we had to, in fact, ask some of the oldest caulkers in the dockyard how to get these out. In fact, they turned out not to be ordinary rivets, but screwed rivets, rather. There's one, in fact. We're just having to go back to the ways that shipbuilding was done 70, 80, 90 years ago.
The next task was to cut giant perforations between each of the 3 sections.
It's been a messy job, very messy job, but you know, we still go to it, and that's it.
How do you feel about the last few inches? Is your heart going to be in your mouth?
No, not really. No, definitely not. Not worried about it because the crane's got the weight.
And as he burnt through the final 3 inches of metal, the crane nursed the submarine's bow, and she parted without complaint. The 40-ton crane generally refuels nuclear submarines, so Holland 1 enjoyed sensitive handling. But it was still a cumbersome operation. A submarine's bow is an awkward shape, particularly lashed to a display cradle. With one section removed, the bowels were clearly visible, crammed not only with equipment and scrap, but also gallons of anti-corrosive chemical. It was barely a week before the dockyard had completed her task, and each section could make the lumbering journey by road to the Submarine Museum in Hampshire. In some cases, missing the bridges by inches. Less than 6 months later, the Navy officially welcomed Holland 1 back from her longest dive. Ironically, a craft once scorned by senior Admiralty officers was now heralded as a far-sighted addition to the Navy and a credit to the museum.
Isn't it elegant, don't you think? That,
yeah.
You know, it goes back into the snipe.
How did it... oh, it goes up and sits up.
Nice, good, positive.
The man to whom she owed her glory, whose research had first revealed her, wasn't there. But she enjoyed the attention and admiration not only of the First Sea Lord, but also the Admiral of the Fleet, the Commander-in-Chief of Naval Home Command, and 500 other dignitaries. And inside she was spruced up for the occasion. But complete renovation will take another 2 years. The Navy aren't saying how much it will all have cost. A lot, they say, was training. And the renovation work is training for Boilermaker apprentices from Vickers at Barrow-in-Furness. They'll make working drawings and then replace bolts in the hull. Already some plates are lifting from exposure to the sunlight.
That looks in frame 13. And then we'll mark it.
Badly rusted and damaged sections will be removed and replicas made. Already on that list are the damaged hydroplanes. Carefully concealed fears that they may have salvaged the wrong submarine have been finally banished. They can now say categorically, this is Holland 1 and worthy of the attention of the First Sea Lord.
Oh, I think she's magnificent. It's remarkable how clever the original designer was, isn't it, when you look at the shape of the submarine and how similar it is, though very much smaller, to what we've got today.
Were you surprised by anything inside?
Oh, just the general condition. I'd heard that she was in good condition, but if I think of anything I had today that I threw into the water and left there for 70 years, it wouldn't look like that.
And from now on, as his modern nuclear submarines prowl near the Eddystone Reef, they'll remember that well before their sleek, sophisticated shape was even conceived, his prototype was already lying 200 feet down on the seabed, dismissed as obsolete.